Yes, good morning. It's Wednesday, the 23rd of September, 2020. My name's Pete Fairbairn. I'm the host. Welcome to the best on-ground weekday kickoff. It's a daily show designed to bring you up to speed with the big stories making waves in the world of sport. And every day I'm lucky enough to have one of the nation's top sports journalists join me on the line. And today we've got Courtney Walsh from The Australian. How are you, Courtney?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Pete. In the Gold Coast at the moment and have my, I suppose, elbow deep in a lot of football at the moment.
Well, that's fantastic that you're out of that 2-week quarantine period and can get around a little bit more freely now. And we are going to start with some football today because it's a great opportunity to talk to you, at least initially here with our first story around the All-Australian squad of 40, which was named yesterday. We're going to look at your story in the Australian here, and there are 24 potential first-time All-Australian players in that squad of 40. The sustained excellence of Patrick Dangerfield will almost certainly see him join some of the AFL's greatest ever players and be named in that final 22-man squad on Thursday. He'll be up for his 8th nomination, I believe, which would put him in the same wheelhouse as the Ablets, Lance Franklin, Robert Harvey, Mark Prosciutto. So it's some pretty esteemed company there. Some other big stories to come out of that include people who've been overlooked. And as I say, we've got 24 potential first-time All-Australians. Talk me through some of the storylines here, Courtney, initially. Let's start with Dangerfield, I guess. Just how special a footballer has he been, and do you expect him to be selected in the All-Australian squad for an 8th time on Thursday?
I had the good fortune of watching him at close hand on Sunday when Geelong beat the Swans in a match that needed to win to make the top 4 and secure the double chance. And look, Dangerfield was the difference. He was really, really quiet, unusually quiet in the first half, well held. But to have that flexibility to be able to throw him forward if needs be, just his explosiveness off the mark, his ability to get in the air, his strength, and he actually kicked pretty straight by Dangerfield standards. I think probably, he'd be right up there with the very, very best of all times if he was a slightly better goal kicker. As it is, he's fair claims to have been among the better players of all time and just so dynamic. So, no surprises that he's nominated, and I'd be absolutely staggered if he wasn't joining that list. The Ablets, Franklin, Prosciutto. There was one other whose name just slipped my mind. Apologies to him, but it's a pretty amazing effort, the consistency to make 8 All-Australian teams. The controversy, I suppose, stemmed around the absence of Todd Goldstein in particular, and Stephen May, the outstanding Melbourne fullback, the North Melbourne Ruckman Goldstein, who have had great years. There'll be more, though. Obviously, by tomorrow night, there'll be only 22 people in that team. And so it's always one of those things where I suppose it can be a little bit subjective. But there's great ones as well. Menegola had been cut. A couple of others who were in there for the first time. Jordan Ridley, the best and fairest. Fantastic to see. So some really good storylines there.
With Todd Goldstein, we've seen my old boss from many, many years ago, Corey McKernan, took to Twitter and had some words to say about the omission of Todd Goldstein. Stephen May from the Melbourne Footy Club, another one, of course, controversially not selected. But you've got to leave somebody out to put them in. Do you think that the right call was made there, or would you be swapping the likes of a Goldstein for Natanui and maybe a May comes in for somebody like maybe a Nick Loston?
Look, I would definitely have had Nick Natanui in there, I think. And I think Natanui is the number one ruckman in the competition. He just has such an influence on matches. It's great to see him fully fit, and I can't wait to see him play. But look, I think Goldstein had claims to having a better year than Max Gawn, for example. So I would have had Goldstein in. Maybe not in the 22 if you go with one ruckman. Natanui is clearly the one, but certainly deserve recognition in that 40. It's a tough one. This is where we get to stages where who should we leave out in place? And I suppose that's the beauty of the 40. You probably could have found room for him, though. That's all I'll say. I'm not sure if I'd leave out Washington either. He's been so good for so long and had another great year.
And just finally on the All-Australian, 24 first-timers. Jordan Ridley's one you mentioned. Christian Petrarca, I would imagine, would be likely to be named. Any others that particularly stick out to you from those who haven't been selected in the 22 before?
That's a good question. Look, I'm not sure whether Ridley will get a gong this year, but certainly it's great to see him win that best and fairest the other night. And to do so, I know Essendon's had a middling year, but to be able to shine after playing only 9 games leading into this season to win a best and fairest is a great effort. Look, Menegola's had a really good year. Whether he can break through, it'll be interesting, but certainly he's played very, very well. A couple of Port players have played very, very well as well. I think Burn Jones was among the nominees. I'd better double check that, but certainly I think he
was.
And I think he brings a lot to Port Adelaide. And in the team that finished on top, you'd hope there's some recognition there.
We're going to stay with football for our second story this morning, and it comes from Peter Ryan in The Age, and he's been speaking with 2020 Coleman medal winner Tom Hawkins, and it's amazing to think he hasn't won a Coleman before, because he's been a wonderful footballer for so many years. But Peter Ryan's been speaking with Tom Hawkins not only about that achievement, but also about the fact that the Geelong Footy Club's been linked with a move for Essendon free agent Joe Daniher. Hawkins saying that he'd be quite happy to play alongside Daniher in a forward line, and doesn't think it's a case of two big key forwards getting in each other's way. The quote here: if a player like Joe, there've been a few others speculated as well, if they're going to improve us and our list management team can fit them in our system and salary cap, then we would absolutely be looking at bringing a player like Joe in. I think Joe Daniher, I think for him, Geelong's a great fit. I don't know if the Cats actually need Joe Daniher perhaps as much as a Brisbane Lions or a Sydney do. And my perspective here is that Geelong should probably be looking more at focusing on a Brad Crouch and maybe having another go at a Sean Higgins or even a Todd Goldstein again, like they did last year. What do you think Geelong need to do over the off-season? We know they could win a premiership this year, so maybe they don't have to do anything at all.
Look, if they can win a premiership this year, that's it's a really strong, I suppose, pointer to the success that they've already got, the list structure they've already got. But what was evident even on Sunday, as we touched on, Dangerfield going forward to kick those 3 goals. It certainly helps Hawkins in one regard, if you have another key forward there, similar to Rowan as a medium-sized forward. I would be more in favour, I think. There's a couple of factors here. Hawkins is now 32. I think he'll get 2 more years, and he's playing so well. But he's 32. But Geelong midfield has players, Dangerfield 31, Selwood's getting older, Duncan's certainly getting older, so they're in their 30s. So there's perhaps a need for a replacement there. Jack Stephen, who they brought in, obviously for not much, is 30 as well. So there's some ageing players in key positions. Whether Crouch is the man, I'm not so sure. Higgins is now 33, so I just don't see what he adds, given there's already age there. Certainly an outstanding player. He'd be fantastic in that team right now, but he's 33. Goldstein is a ruckman, again, outstanding, but again, he's 33, so there's some age issues there if you start looking at older players. Daniher, if he gets going, is a really good player. The price is interesting. Geelong's always had a fairly even spread in terms of the salary cap. So you wouldn't want to be playing someone who hasn't played a lot of football or barely any football in the last 3 years, has great potential, but certainly, hasn't shown that, obviously, due to injury in the last couple of years. You risk bringing in someone a massive, massive coin, perhaps more than virtually everyone else on that list. You wonder what that can cause in terms of cultural issues. So there's a risk to it, but he's such a talent. He's a country boy like Hawkins was. It's no surprise that Tom Hawkins is a very decent man. We'll talk well about anyone, I think. But what to weigh up? The benefits, if they get him right, he's an outstanding player and a match winner, and a dual-pronged attack with Hawkins and Dangerfield running around next year. Hawkins and Daniher running next year with the potential to throw Dangerfield forward and Rowan sort of having bursts. It could be unstoppable.
You mentioned Gary Rowan and Jack Stephen, 2 examples of Geelong taking a punt on somebody who hasn't played a lot of football for different reasons. Rowan with his pretty horrific run of injuries over the journey. Luke Dalhouse has had a good impact on that team as well. They're not the type to go down the rebuild path, the Cats. They back themselves in from a recruitment perspective. So I think one thing is for certain, we will see them active at trade period again this year. Our third story today, we turn to a story from Marco Monteverde via the News Corp Australia Wire. And this is one that's really caught both of our eyes. It comes from the Super Netball competition. Queensland Firebirds' first Aboriginal player has called for Super Netball's Indigenous round to be scrapped unless the sport truly embraces the Indigenous community. This comes after current Firebirds coach Rosalie Jenke admitted that she misread community expectations by not giving Super Netball's only Indigenous player, Gemma Mai, some court time in the competition's weekend Indigenous round. That was based on the player being used heavily to market the competition. The Firebirds are out of finals contention already, so there wasn't a lot riding on the result of the game, though I do note that they did manage to upset the minor premiers in a narrow win. Gemma Maimai has played 9 matches of Super Netball previously, so it's not like she's a complete rookie who isn't capable at this level. And it was pretty surprising to see her not get a run, and pretty surprising as well when we look at Super Netball and the fact that there is only one Indigenous player in the competition, despite the fact 13% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander girls aged 4 to 14 participate in netball in some form or the other. Do the Queensland Firebirds get this one wrong, Courtney? And does netball have more to do to engage Indigenous girls and women?
Well, look, I think we put it to the club and say, as Marco did, and didn't get many phone calls back, apparently initially, according to that story, until a statement was released late in the day, acknowledging that there were some issues and that perhaps it would have been better to do it. I certainly think that if you've got the talent there, if you've used them in a marketing perspective, but also for the inspiration and what that can provide for younger women, younger girls, particularly from the Indigenous community, as to what to look forward to in the future. Far better to see someone out there running around than someone sitting on the sidelines. And I think that's disheartening as well for the player. I think that has to be a difficult situation. I can understand the form, and if you have a great win, fantastic. But if you're not playing finals, we see so many sports where teams look to the future, look to broader things. So clearly there was an acknowledgement that perhaps we got this one wrong. I'd love to see more women coming through and making the grade at the elite level in terms of netball from an Indigenous population. I think in the AFL we've got something like 10 to 11% of Indigenous players. So that's a significant step up from just the one player. It's surprising to me, and I'm sure that's something that they're working on at netball headquarters to try and figure out a pathway that makes it more successful.
That number you give there, Courtney, sorry to clarify, is that in the AFL or the AFLW competition?
No, the AFL. The AFL. But there is certainly some AFLW players as well. I'd have to double check to find what that percentage is. Yeah,
sure. And I mean, that's not the premise of the show, to put you on the spot for raw numbers at 7:15 in the morning. I think the Firebirds also, putting out a statement at 11 o'clock roughly on Monday night, not speaking to media about this is really poor judgment as well. If you're going to make this decision and you back yourself that you've made it for the right reasons, and you need to get on the front foot and you need to explain what that decision is. You need to communicate with the player. Clearly, some of the alumni of the netball club, with Indigenous backgrounds, are really upset and disappointed. And I feel awful for the player, the amount of scrutiny that she's going to come under. It's just not a good look for the game, I guess. And we applaud organisations and competitions embracing Indigenous rounds and Indigenous jerseys and the like. But it needs to be a genuine commitment, to genuinely investing in that space. We're going to turn from netball to rugby, and a story from Christy Doran via rugby.com.au today. And we're looking back on the fact that yesterday was finally the first ever training session that new Wallabies head coach Dave Rennie could have with his extended squad. Of course, COVID has prevented Rennie from being able to do what his predecessor Michael Checker did and fly around to the different franchises in Super Rugby and spend some time with them during the season. Of course, he's been quarantining on the Gold Coast and before moving into New South Wales for this camp in the Hunter Valley. That team will fly out to New Zealand in a few days' time to take on the All Blacks in a couple of Bledisloe Cup tests. But Rennie really hands-on at training yesterday. He's got the likes of Scott Wisemantle in there alongside him, and also Matty Taylor, which is a quality looking on paper, at least, Wallabies coaching team. Now that the Dave Rennie era has officially begun for the Wallabies, from an on-field sense of things, Courtney, do you think there's a real sense of excitement developing around Australian rugby?
Look, I really enjoyed that story. I'll say firsthand that I'm not a rugby expert, but I certainly love my Bledisloe Cup tests and World Cups. And knowing a little bit about Rennie's coaching background, it's great to see that I think we've got another high caliber coach. It'll be fascinating to see how it works against the old rival, obviously, across the Tasman. The hands-on factor, I think, is fantastic. And it's certainly a way to set a tone for a coach. If you're right out there in the midst of the action in terms of a training session, as well as you need the technical genius and the nous and the ability to find the best out of players. But if you're out there showing that you're right in the centre, you're there, to really make a change, make a difference, I think it's fantastic. So I think there'll certainly be some excitement. I thought some of the comments in that story were particularly interesting from a, I suppose, wondering how coaches go about doing, what methodology they think works best. It'll be interesting to see if Rennie's still out there for all of the sessions in the coming weeks, or whether this was just early stages, and perhaps see, having been tripped up as well in terms of in quarantine, might be very happy to be out there and get to being active for a period. But it'll be really interesting to see how Australia goes in those two tests. I think it'll be, it's been obviously such a testing time for a lot, but even just having that local success is not getting beaten up in the, I suppose, by the Africans or the New Zealanders, it's got to be a step forward. There's not the doubting of optimism leaning in.
Yeah, that's right. We know how the doom and gloom can get when New Zealand Super Rugby teams get on a run against Australian or South African, as you say. The quote, one of the quotes I think you're referencing there that I really liked as well, comes from Boom, Junior Wallabies youngster Harry Wilson, who's in line to make his Test debut, who says, yeah, he's been real hands-on. Obviously, he's got his assistants, but everything's going through him. On the field today, he was running most of the drills, and he was just keeping us honest, making sure that we were doing everything 100%, because he knows how important it is against the New Zealand teams not to slack off. And speculation that the Wallabies will fly across the ditch in a few days' time, and there will be a small period of quarantine. We know the Aussie and New Zealand governments had to negotiate that. So I would have thought that Wallabies squad will probably have some pretty full noise training sessions today and tomorrow before they do fly across there, because they will have to rest up for a few days over there. And I think by then their bodies will probably need it. Our final story today, Courtney, we can't have you on the show without talking some tennis. We know the French Open, the qualifying going on as we speak, but the main draw a little way away, and Novak Djokovic won the Rome Masters over the weekend. Rafa Nadal knocked out in the quarterfinals of that one. But a story from Tennis Magazine from John Burkock, which showcases the fact that Novak Djokovic has actually surpassed Pete Sampras to become the second all-time in terms of weeks spent at number one in the world. He's hit 287 weeks. The master is Roger Federer, who's spent 310 career weeks at number one, which means that the Joker needs 23 more weeks to tie the Swiss, which is looking fairly likely considering he's won 5 of the last 8 majors, and Federer himself, unfortunately, due to injury, it doesn't necessarily look all that likely that he would return to the number one spot in the future. Novak hasn't been all that popular this year with tennis fans. We've talked about the reasons verbatim, but do we need to reconcile that unhappiness a little bit with acknowledging the likelihood that he could well become the greatest player of all time? And just on that, is he going to win a second French Open next month?
I think it's indisputable he's been the player of the last decade. That's inarguable. The successes he's had at the ATP, to a level in terms of the Masters wins, but also the Grand Slam wins, where he's rapidly closed in on Federer and Nadal. Without doubt, he's been the player of the last decade. Still think there's a little bit to play out in terms of who the greatest of all time will be. He's still got to make up 3 on Federer, which, as well as he's playing and as dominant as he's been in the last couple of years, as he was sort of in 2015, 2016, you've still got to win 4 majors to get past Federer, and he's 33, and players can come quickly. We've seen some very, very, very talented young players around. Great win in Rome, absolutely. Nadal getting knocked out is a big bonus. The fascinating factor about this French Open will be the timing. In May, sort of June, the courts are a bit livelier. They'll be jumping around at summer. So it'll be interesting to see what impact, I suppose, being played in sort of our version of autumn, how that pans out in terms of the court pace, the court speed, the heaviness of the balls. I'm not as certain that it'll suit Nadal as what it would be a lively court, because he gets such great topspin from the ball, and Djokovic is possibly better suited in that regard. I'd still have Rafa as the overwhelming favourite, though. I think he does get beaten on clay occasionally. Schwartzman's a very, very fine player who beat him. He's an outstanding clay courter himself, and it was his first tournament back. So I would still have Nadal as the favourite. I think he'll improve. Derive great benefit from that, and I think he's clearly the man to beat. But Novak obviously is right up there. He's only won once at Roland Garros back in 2016. That completed a non-calendar year Grand Slam, but also a career Grand Slam for him. No one disputes his brilliance on the court. No one disputes, I think, the fact that he's actually trying to get the best for players outside of him in terms of his agitation. Whether he's gone about it the right way in that regard is another question in terms of the forming a new players' union to try and, I suppose, derive greater benefits from or reap greater rewards for players. So I don't think there's any questions about that. Just I suppose, some of the COVID-19 behaviour was unfortunate. Again, probably from the right place. The anti-vaccination comments, well, I can't cop that, but that's, I think that's a significant issue for him to overcome, and people will find that very strange. But as a player, unbelievable.
And obviously, as US Open disqualification, despite the fact that it's poor form to be whacking balls like that, and it shows an inability to control his temper. At the same time, he did get unlucky. There was no malice or intent in the action, and he got kicked out of that tournament. So, yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think we're going to look back in a few years' time and pinch ourselves that we got to watch these three absolute marvels of world sport, going head to head for so long. And it's a debate that will go on long into the night. Courtney, that's all we've got time for this morning on the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. Thanks so much for giving up your time. Great to have you back on the show, and look forward to chatting to you during AFL Finals. Yeah, it should be a very good month coming up. You've been watching and listening to the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. We'll see you tomorrow with Croc Media's Benny Jones. Cheers.